This is Real Life with Deb Waterbury, a real show for real people with real issues. And now, here's your host, Dr. Deb Waterbury.
Well, welcome to our last episode in this 4-week series we've been doing on grief. And honestly, this has been, I love when I get to have the Rills with me. They've been with me before on the show, but we decided because it's been, and we had such feedback the last time we had them about a year ago. We decided we want to do a whole series with just Bob and Bobby Rill, who run the Grief and Wellness group here actually in Tucson, Arizona. We had such feedback and they have such success. We wanted to do a series with them. And so we've already done 3 weeks before this one. If you haven't caught those 3 weeks, I really, really encourage you to go back to Deb Waterbury YouTube channel and you can see all 3 of those episodes. We actually talked about what grief was. We identified the symptoms. And then last week we talked about where and how to get help if you're feeling those symptoms of grief. This week, I've got Bob Rill with me. Hey, Bob.
Hello.
So Bob's going to wind this series up with me, and we're actually talking about helping children who are grieving. And, you know, this is tricky because I guess we don't really, well, you do think about children grieving, but thinking about helping them, that's different, isn't it?
Well, it is and it isn't. Children know how to grieve by the time they're 4 and 5 years old.
Yeah.
And it's once we teach them the bad things,
right,
the myths that we all grew up with,
right,
then they start to adapt new ideas of how grief is.
So if we weren't to help them at all, would they grieve appropriately, you reckon?
At an early age.
At an early age, okay.
Very certainly.
So what makes I don't know if this was a question, but I'm curious now. What does that look like? What is an appropriate way for a child? How do they know how to grieve? What do they do?
Well, what are one of the first things that a child is going to lose? A pet.
A pet, yes. A pet. Very good.
So, generally what will happen is they'll discover that pet, and then they'll say it's a hamster. Pet hamster, they come in and it's laying there unresponsive.
CPR hasn't worked.
There you go. And so then they can generally, if they have a service for the animal, shoebox service, buried it in the backyard.
Done those, yes.
And then say some very kind things too, just like we would have for a funeral service. And if the parents participate in that and talk about the things that they remember about the hamster and so forth.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, then after a few weeks or a month or so, the child could then adopt a new one. The one illustration that I heard with regard to a hamster that was done, the mother discovered that when the boy got the new hamster, he was telling the new pet about his old pet.
Oh.
I hope we can still be friends like the old.
Oh, how sweet is that?
It is. And so, there's a sense that they know a loss and can adapt to that pretty well.
So is it because they're not trying to stuff it?
That's right.
They allow themselves to feel it.
That's right. They're able to talk about it,
yes,
and everything. And the parents either encourage that or they stymie it. So if a dog is sick, and it goes to the farm, as so often is the expression,
yes,
and all of a sudden the child misses it or whatever, then they don't have a chance to process that very well, and so forth. So, it's not until a child is really jaded, if you can use that word.
Right. Well, see, that seems to suggest that not grieving appropriately is a learned thing, that you don't naturally grieve inappropriately, but you learn to grieve inappropriately or not grieve at all.
And the real key is as an adult, if we learn how to grieve, then each of those experiences become a teachable moment for a child. And as that experience comes with them by the time they reach adulthood and get their heart broken by their first girlfriend, boyfriend, and that they begin to be able to learn how to process those things real well, and it doesn't create the emotional duress
That's very good.
that they want.
So some of the first losses then are always, like you said, pets. Could be a grandparent. An aging. What other kind of losses do children sometimes? Because it's not always death. I mean, what other kinds of things might they experience?
Well, one of the top 10 is the move.
Gosh, you don't think about that. And I know Bobby and you have as well on past shows, even a year ago, brought that up. And that got such response from some of my listeners and my viewers, because nobody really thinks about that.
Right.
That a move is a grieving experience, but it really is.
It is. My dad was a pastor, and so we moved a couple of times.
Yes.
And we stayed in Oklahoma for most of my years, right through elementary school and junior high and so forth, and then moved. So all the kids that I knew and had gone to school with, grew up with, were in fact friends and acquaintances and everything. Matter of fact, this is the Norman Rockwell neighborhood that I lived in. You could go down, and you never came home to go to the bathroom. You just knocked on somebody's door and went in and got a cookie on the way out.
Exactly. I know, weren't those the days?
Yes. and the men in the neighborhood taught us things like some mechanics on lawnmowers and things of that nature. So there was just a community that was involved in that. So when I was picked up and moved, and of course being a pastor, we didn't own the parsonage, and so it never went up for sale. There was no hint that we were moving.
Right, and you still
all of a sudden, they have the black pickup that the trash went in, pulled up one place, and the moving truck pulled up in another place, and wow. What's happening?
I guess we're leaving, huh, Betty?
What's happening?
And I guess it's that loss of foundation, that loss of consistency or safety in that they would grieve. I imagine. I mean, we all do, because what you know is now taken from you, and so your ground is almost
exactly.
And so that's probably I guess I can see why a move would be a big. What would be something else that a child might grieve? I'm just thinking about parents out there who might not recognize that their child is grieving.
Well, of course, the big one is divorce. When a parent leaves the home and so forth, and the child generally blames themselves for a portion of that and so forth. And then they're often divided between homes. The week they stay with the mom, and then the weekends they go spend with dad. Right. And sometimes it can be the fun dad, and sometimes it can be the dad that just orders pizza and watches television.
Well, are the symptoms, because I think it was you that was on my show a couple of weeks ago that talked about the symptoms of grief. Are they the same for children?
Well, they would be.
Okay.
They would be. You would see a change in their demeanor and so forth, so that they're not as happy. They perhaps most common is don't do well in school and so forth, can't concentrate and so forth.
Right.
So,
and maybe act out a little more sometimes, or just even withdraw and stay away from their friends, or maybe, I don't know if this is helpful or not, but I would imagine that if a parent is kind of thinking that, they may talk to teachers or friends, parents or whatever, just to see if that behavior is happening within their child, if they're not really seeing all of it. I mean, is it appropriate to try to figure that out?
Generally in school, the teachers are going to contact them.
That's true. Yeah, having been an educator, that's exactly what you do.
and so that's going to be a natural flow of information from it. But I think most parents are familiar enough with their children, if they lose their appetite and things of that nature, that or start acting out or start showing anger toward the parent.
What an amazing thing, because parents, when they get to this and they have to move because of work, or the pet died, they can't rightly bring them back to life, or whatever, all those things that their children are going to grieve for, then they may be lost at this point where what do I do? And the thing is that I think y'all walk them through the same sort of process, don't you?
Well, we don't actually work with children.
Okay.
We want 18-year-olds, give or take a year, depends on the maturity of the person. But as a result of working with a parent, then we can give them the direction that they, and when's the proper time for a person to get counseling for grief? Before it happens, actually.
That's true. Yeah, it's kind of like getting close to God. You want to do it before the stuff happens, not do when things are going well. Yeah.
And the thing is all of us as adults have experienced some grieving experience that we can walk through, and we may be more lucid in terms of understanding and grasping the concepts.
And I reckon that it probably might be even better for a child, and they would receive it better from a parent that understood and had been walking through them, being guided through y'all through that process, than that they can teach their children that be a natural progression anyway, right?
Absolutely. And you saved a life so that they not have to go through the grief that we as adults had to go through before we learned this process.
So what would your advice be to parents then? What would you tell them? How can they help their child? They know they've suffered some kind of loss, or something's happened, there's been a change in their, what would you say to them? How can they help their child?
Well, again, it depends on the intensity of the loss. The loss of a parent is much different than a loss of a parakeet.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So there's one illustration that I heard that was just really kind of neat, and it's called reframing. So one person said that he was dropped off at the doorstep by a space ship, and that he could prove that. And well, how could you prove that? He says, when everybody's born, they end up with some sort of belly button. Catches lint, have it and everything. He says, I don't have a belly button. And so everybody was kind of shocked to hear that. And he says, really, I had a belly button when I was born. But instead of dying like a normal belly button does, it continued to grow. It became painful and everything. When I was 6 and 7, I wasn't allowed to wear a belt because of the pain and so forth. And so I went to school with suspenders on. And of course, what happens on the playground with a kid with suspenders? He becomes
teased, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And so he said, even as a 7-year-old, I remember exactly what the doctor said in there, what the conversation was, word for word, with my parents, which shows you that we don't forget things as easily as we think.
Yes.
And so what ended up happening is they finally found a doctor that says, well, he doesn't need that thing anymore. Let's take it out. And so they took and removed what was continuing to grow that in his body, and removed it. After the healing came to place, his dad knelt down in front of him and gave him his first belt and helped him put it on. As he was putting on that belt, his dad told him, you're a lot different than other people. You're more modern. Everybody has a button. Now you got a zipper. And for that child, it just was changing the whole attitude.
Reframing the situation.
Exactly. So, things like that parents can learn and do that will actually prevent the child from carrying that burden of all the teasing that he got before.
And y'all at the Grief and Wellness Group will teach them how to do that if they reach out to you.
We do a program called Helping Children Grieve. It's a 4-week program.
Yes.
And it's a lot of role playing and things of that nature, so that
that's so good.
They can bring their circumstances that are there.
Yeah, that's so good. And I know that's going to be so useful for somebody who's watching right now. To know that you're not in this trying to figure out what to do, that there are people that are professionally able to do this. And I'm telling you, I've told you for 4 weeks, this process works, and what Bob and Bobby do work. And so I really would encourage you that, especially if you have a child that has suffered some kind of loss, be it just a pet or a parent, we don't know, or anything in between, get the tools you need so that you can help your child through that. Because as Bob said, you are saving a life, and you're saving a life that will grow up and never having dealt with those things. And the thing is that you're teaching at a young age things that they're going to be able to use all throughout their life.
Absolutely.
And so that because everybody lose, loss is part of life. And as you lose, if you already know how to deal with it from the time you're a child, then you don't become a person who's in their 40s or 50s who has let grief just eat them to pieces because they haven't sought that help. Thank you so much, Bob. So this is the last week of our grief series. We're going to have all the information underneath about where you can go to get in touch with Bob and Bobby at the Grief and Wellness Group. Their website is Grief the Thief. That's one word, griefthethief.com, because Bobby says that grief will steal your joy, will steal everything from you. So griefthethief.com. We also have the phone number down here. If you're watching on Facebook, go to my YouTube channel. That's where you're going to see all that. And either any venue that you're watching and or listening, please go ahead and give us some comments. If you have any questions, put those underneath. We'll make sure that Bob and Bobby get those and that can get back in touch with you. Grief is not something that you have to die with. It's not something you have to live with. It's not a place that you have where you just have to deal with it. There's hope, and there is a process, and there are people who can help you. So be the one who's wise enough to reach out and get that help. Thank you so much, Bob.
Thank you.
God bless you guys, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining me today on this episode of Real Life with Deb Waterbury. I hope it's been a blessing to you as much as it was to me. If you want any of my books or information on articles or any of my speaking engagements, you can go to my website at debwaterbury.com. God bless you.